A lot was written this year about teachers and schools, but what do teachers actually think? And how can their perspectives help us as we make sense of a difficult year and as we look ahead to the fall? Just as we did last year, we partnered with the nonprofit Inverness Institute, and today we published the first of two sets of findings from a survey of nearly 100 veteran teachers from across the state. Many are in leadership roles. To whet your interest to explore what I know you'll find interesting and to an extent disturbing results, I've asked two principals of the surveys, Dan Humphrey and Allison Murray, to summarize the findings. Dan's a prominent education researcher. He chairs the Inverness Board of Directors. Allison is a data analyst and researcher at Inverness. How did teachers say their students did this year, and what was their reaction? Allison.
One of the questions that we asked them was, did they agree that students at their schools have had significant learning losses during the pandemic? And most teachers agreed with this, at least to some extent. There were many issues that they pointed out that students are currently dealing with. So within the classroom, they talked about how students are having difficulties working with their peers. They have shorter attention spans. And then this, of course, makes it more difficult to readjust to being in the classroom. Outside of the classroom, they said students are less willing to do homework and they're less willing to engage in independent projects and more concerned about it this year than last year. So that in itself is very distressing.
You know, what struck me as a little bit paradoxical is that after spending a year basically by themselves, they come back to school and they had difficulty relating and working independently when in theory that's what they were supposed to be doing the previous years. Any insights as to why that happened?
You know, it's really hard to say. You know, what they talked about is the reluctance that students have to engage with one another. And so I think that played out in ways that when they're in the classroom, working independently on projects and working with peers was a real problem for them.
What did the leading teachers report about their schools and their districts and the role of the communities?
Generally, in terms of schools and districts, they focused on personnel issues. So they cited lots of examples of resignations. So let's listen to a quote from a teacher that I think really captures this problem the best.
Never have I seen so many exemplary educators on the verge of tears and barely hanging on. Teaching has always been hard. Now it's harder than ever. Staff shortages and lack of subs, combined with frequent independent studies, has been a huge challenge. Our students also need more SEL than ever. The trauma they bring to school weighs heavy on the staff serving them.
Allison, did the findings get on a personal level about how teachers viewed their own roles and what they went through?
Well, as you know, it's been very, very, very challenging year. And of course, that's an understatement. Teachers have been adapting to the ever-changing environment, and that's been very difficult. There have been many disruptions in the classroom due to the student absences and staff shortages that Dan was talking about. We've heard teachers talk about that classes will get combined when substitutes can't be found. Counselors and social workers are being redeployed to cover classes when teachers are absent. So that in itself is very difficult. Overall, there's burnout, there's exhaustion, and constant stress is the new normal. And teachers talk about having to take on additional roles, additional responsibilities, additional duties. And some of these they haven't been trained for. There's also a demoralizing atmosphere in general within the community, disrespect from students, from parents. So teachers are up against that. And then I think maybe the most startling finding of all is that 40% of the teachers said that they plan to teach until retirement age. So only 40% of this group. And that's compared to 70% who answered that same question last year.
Yeah, that's quite startling. Well, Dan, then what did they say then about the future of education in general, as opposed to their own individual future in the next couple of years?
You know, they're decidedly worried and concerned about the future. You know, they all of the things that we've been talking about, they look around and they see good teachers leaving. They see sort of their own loss of commitment or declining commitment. They see all of the disruption of the polarization in the society in general and around schools in particular. And they see the inequities getting worse. When we tallied up all of the comments they made about in response to the question about the future of public education in California, 63% of the comments were negative and only 14% were positive. There were another 24% that were basically neutral, but I would say overall, it's not a pretty picture in terms of their perspective on where we're headed.
Okay, Allison, so let's focus for a moment on the 14%. What are there any silver linings to come out of teaching during the pandemic this past year?
Well, I think there are some. There have been some that teachers have reported. And one of those silver linings is just being back in school with students, being able to build or rebuild relationships with their students, not having to do that through Zoom. And we do have an audio quote from one of the teachers that expresses that very well.
Before the pandemic, I don't think that I had really realized the social and emotional importance of the work that I do. Pandemic teaching also gave me insight into how well we are really doing in a regular class setting. I'm happier teaching after the pandemic than I was going into it. I really loathed teaching on Zoom.
And then other silver linings that teachers have mentioned is that both teachers and students have improved their technical skills. So teachers report that they feel more confident integrating technology and apps into their teaching. In addition to improving their technical skills, teachers also said they've made other positive changes to their teaching practices. And some of the changes they mention are doing more project-based learning, doing deeper dives into subject matter rather than trying to cover everything. So they're focusing or emphasizing on key concepts more.
So let's take the personal to the policy and how we can sort of generalize on that. And so I know you asked the question, what do teachers recommend to policymakers to improve schools?
We asked a number of questions around policy. And I think the first thing that we learned was that these teachers were pretty skeptical of the benefits that state and federal funds provided their districts. They questioned the district's capacity to actually spend the money effectively. And 2/3 of them said that staff shortages and student absenteeism sort of overwhelmed the investment by the state and federal funds, and that they were the quote was, did little to help. They are, however, quite supportive, or these teachers at least are quite supportive of some of the new state initiatives. With over 3/4 of these teachers in support of efforts to improve early literacy, strengthen the teacher pipeline, expand learning opportunities program, and to stabilize funding that, to address the declining enrollment problem.
Well, they've had a lot to say, and I hope that EdSource readers take a look at this survey. And I'm Dan and Allison, thanks for joining us today and giving us a preview as to what they will find. Thanks for coming.